What happens when fake cops try to take down the wrong woman? Picture this. A quiet night. A black woman sitting peacefully inside her own home, finally able to breathe after a long day. Suddenly, a violent pounding rattles the front door, followed by shouts of authority, men in uniforms demanding she open up, accusing her of trespassing in her very own house. Confused, heart racing, she steps forward, only to be grabbed and handcuffed before she can even explain. They claim they're enforcing the rules, but something about their badges and papers feels off, like a performance, a dangerous game. The neighborhood lights flicker as curious neighbors peek out, but no one dares step in. She looks powerless, trapped in her own living room, surrounded by strangers with fake authority. But here's the twist they never saw coming. This isn't just any woman. She's someone they should have never underestimated. Stay with me until the end, because when the truth about who she really is comes out, it will leave you stunned. And if you love gripping true story dramatizations like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Her name was Captain Danielle Roberts, a woman who had spent more than 2 decades serving her city with honor, courage, and an unshakable belief in justice. But tonight she wasn't on duty. Tonight she was just Danielle, a daughter, a sister, a neighbor, sitting in the living room of the house she had only recently bought, a modest but beautiful home she considered her sanctuary. The walls still smelled faintly of fresh paint, her boxes half unpacked, family photos leaning against the mantel instead of hanging neatly on the wall. Every corner of this place held the promise of new beginnings. The small garden she planned to tend, the porch swing where she imagined drinking coffee on lazy Sunday mornings, the upstairs office where she would finally hang her framed commendations. She was proud of this home, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. It was hers, bought with the sweat of years of long shifts, late nights, and sacrifices most people would never see. But beneath that sense of pride lingered an unease she couldn't quite name. This neighborhood wasn't like the others she had lived in. It was governed by an HOA, a group that claimed to keep everything orderly, but from what she'd heard, it was notorious for bullying residents, especially newcomers. Danielle had caught glimpses of it already, the way a neighbor stopped her at the mailbox to ask if she really lived there, the subtle stares when she parked her car in the driveway, the icy silence when she waved hello and got no response. Some even whispered about board members who sent security to check on houses without notice, acting like an army instead of a committee. At first, she brushed it off, chalking it up to the resistance any outsider might face in a close-knit community. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. Some nights cars would roll slowly past her driveway, their headlights lingering a little too long on her windows. Once when she stepped out to take the trash, she noticed curtains across the street twitch shut, as if someone had been spying and didn't want to be caught. Danielle wasn't easily rattled. After all, she had faced armed suspects, violent confrontations, and life-or-death moments in her career. Yet there was something different about this kind of tension, something unsettling about not knowing whether the threat was real or imagined. This wasn't the chaos of the streets. This was a quiet, creeping hostility that seeped in through cracks she couldn't seal. Tonight, as she sipped her tea and looked around at the half-finished home she was eager to make her own, she reminded herself that she had faced worse. She told herself the whispers didn't matter, that the suspicious stares would fade once people realized she belonged here. But deep down, she knew the unease was more than just new neighborhood jitters. Something was brewing, and she could feel it pressing against the edges of her peace like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. It was just past midnight when the peace of Danielle's new home shattered. A thunderous pounding rattled her front door, each strike echoing through the quiet house like a warning drum. Startled, she set her teacup down, heart suddenly hammering in her chest. The pounding came again, louder this time, followed by sharp, commanding voices. "Open up! Show us security! This property is restricted!" Danielle froze. Restricted? This was her home. Rising slowly, she approached the door, peering through the peephole. Outside stood three men in dark uniforms, the word security stitched across their chests, badges gleaming in the porch light. Their posture was aggressive, their hands resting on holstered weapons. She cracked the door open just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" The tallest of them sneered. "You're trespassing. This residence doesn't belong to you. Step outside immediately." Confusion rushed through her veins. "That's impossible. I own this property," she said, reaching for the deed folder she kept near the entryway. She held it up, her name bold across the page, along with her state-issued ID, but the men didn't even glance at it. Instead, one snatched the papers from her hand and waved them off with a scoff. "Fake," he spat. "You think a piece of paper makes this yours?" Danielle's instinct screamed. Something about their manner, their clipped, rehearsed lines, didn't add up. Real officers didn't act like this. Real officers didn't ignore identification, didn't dismiss legal documents. Her gut told her these men were imposters, but before she could push back, the situation escalated. One stepped forward suddenly, shoving the door wide. "You're under arrest for unlawful entry," he barked. Danielle stumbled back, stunned by the sheer audacity. "Arrest? This is my house," she shouted, but the words barely left her mouth before another seized her wrist. Cold, unyielding steel clamped tight around her arm, followed by the other. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed louder than the pounding had moments before. And just like that, in her own living room, Captain Danielle Roberts, decorated officer, homeowner, and law-abiding citizen, was treated like a criminal by strangers, claiming authority they didn't have. Danielle's breath came fast and shallow as the cuffs bit into her wrists, the metallic sting grounding her in the terrifying reality unfolding inside her own living room. She struggled to twist free, her voice steady but sharp with outrage. "This is my home. You have no right to be here." The men barely reacted, their faces unreadable masks of false authority. The tallest one, clearly the leader, pulled a crumpled stack of papers from his jacket and waved them in front of her like they were irrefutable proof. "Not anymore. According to this, the property belongs to the HOA. You're the intruder." Danielle blinked at the documents. The words smudged, signatures jagged, seals that looked like they had been copied from a cheap printer. Years of police work had trained her eyes to spot forgeries instantly, and these were laughable. But the absurdity didn't ease the tension, it heightened it. Whoever these men were, they weren't just playing dress-up. They had planned this. They had come prepared, armed not only with fake papers, but with intimidation tactics designed to make her feel powerless. Her instinct screamed at her to reach for her phone, to call for backup, but the second she shifted her weight toward the side table, one of the men snatched it up. "You won't be needing this," he sneered, slipping the phone into his pocket as if it were his property. A wave of fury surged through Danielle, mingling with the sickening twist of fear in her stomach. She wasn't afraid of confrontation. She had faced violent suspects in dark alleys, had stared down men twice her size who meant her real harm. But this was different. This was inside the walls she thought would keep her safe. This was her sanctuary turned prison, her freedom stripped by impostors whose arrogance made them dangerous. The cuffs dug deeper as the men shoved her onto the couch. One leaned in close, his breath sour, his whisper laced with menace. "You don't belong here. People like you never do." The words hit harder than the shove. Danielle had worn the uniform long enough to know exactly what he meant. It wasn't just about a house or a deed. It was about her skin, her presence in a neighborhood that had already marked her as an outsider. Anger flared hot behind her eyes, memories crashing in. The first time she pinned on her badge, the oath she swore to protect and serve, the nights she had comforted victims who felt powerless. And now, here she was, experiencing that same helplessness she had once vowed to shield others from. Outside, motion stirred. Through the curtains, she glimpsed flickers of movement, neighbors peeking out, drawn by the shouts. Some pressed phones to their windows, recording, while others quickly retreated, blinds snapping shut as if terrified to be involved. The weight of their silence pressed on her chest. How many times had she heard victims say, "No one stepped up, no one helped," because fear was stronger than justice. And now she was living it. The irony twisted like a knife. The leader waved the fake documents again, smirking. "You're going to come with us, quietly, or this gets ugly." Danielle forced herself to steady her breathing, to think. Training drilled into her over decades urged her to de-escalate, but nothing about these men hinted at reason. Their goal wasn't order, it was control. She studied them with the sharp eye of a detective, cataloging details, mismatched gear, scuffed boots that didn't match standard-issue uniforms, radios that gave off no static or chatter. The longer she looked, the clearer it became. These men weren't cops, weren't even licensed security. They were frauds, mercenaries hiding behind fabricated authority. Her mind raced through possibilities. Were they hired by the HOA, paid to drive her out? Or was this something deeper, something personal? She couldn't know, not yet. But what she did know was that they had underestimated her. They thought she was just another homeowner, another victim too frightened to fight back. They had no idea who she really was, no idea the storm they were unleashing by pushing her this far. Still, the cuffs bound her hands, the phone was gone, and the room felt smaller by the second. Every option ran through her head: resist now and risk escalation, or bide her time and wait for the right opening. She clenched her jaw, forcing her heartbeat into rhythm. She couldn't let fear make her reckless. She couldn't give them the satisfaction of panic. A sudden crash echoed outside, the sound of a garbage can tipping over, maybe an animal, maybe a neighbor retreating too quickly. The men stiffened, glancing toward the window. Their paranoia showed cracks in their confidence, a small confirmation that they weren't as in control as they wanted her to believe. Danielle filed it away, another detail she could use. The silence stretched between them, tense and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of a streetlight outside and the occasional shuffle of boots against hardwood. And then came the whisper in her mind, the voice of her old mentor from the academy, a phrase she had carried through every case, every trial: observe, assess, survive. She replayed it like a mantra, forcing herself to stay sharp. Every second brought her information, and information was power. Her wrists burned where the cuffs cut into skin, but she leaned into the pain, letting it anchor her. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to strip her of dignity, to make her feel small. She had clawed her way up in a system designed to doubt her, had proven herself again and again in rooms where no one thought she belonged. And she wasn't about to let 3 imposters in cheap uniforms undo that. Still, a gnawing question twisted in her gut. Who sent them? Why target her so soon after she moved in? It couldn't be coincidence. They knew who she was, or at least who they thought she wasn't. But what they didn't know, the truth they were blind to, was that Captain Danielle Roberts was not someone who broke under pressure. She was someone who turned pressure into fire. And that fire was building slow and steady, waiting for the exact moment to ignite. The tension snapped like glass under pressure when the so-called leader of the fake officers lifted his radio and pressed the side button, speaking into it with forced authority. "Dispatch, we've got the suspect in custody. Preparing for transport." The static that followed was hollow, empty, a dead channel. Danielle's trained ear caught it instantly. No real dispatch on the other end, no chatter, no background noise, just a staged performance meant to intimidate. A sharp laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it, startling the men. She straightened in her seat despite the cuffs digging into her wrists, her eyes narrowing with a fire they hadn't seen before. "You really think I don't know what a real dispatch sounds like?" she said, her voice low and steady, carrying the weight of authority. The leader smirked, ready to bark back, but she cut him off, her voice rising with the power of truth. "You made the biggest mistake of your lives tonight. My name is Captain Danielle Roberts, badge number 4517, Metropolitan Police. And as of this moment, you're under arrest." The room froze. For a second, the air itself seemed to stop moving, the weight of her words crashing down on the imposters like a storm. Their smug expressions faltered, eyes darting nervously between each other as the reality of who they had just cuffed sank in. One of them muttered, "She's bluffing," but the tremor in his voice betrayed his doubt. Danielle leaned forward, every inch the commanding officer she had been trained to be, the steel in her voice cutting through their fragile bravado. "You think I'm bluffing? Try me. The second you stepped through that door, you committed a felony, impersonating an officer, unlawful detention, breaking and entering. Do you know how many years you just bought yourselves?" Panic flickered in their eyes, cracks spreading through their tough facades. The leader tried to regain control, barking orders at his partners. But before he could string his lies back together, red and blue lights flashed through the window. Tires screeched against asphalt. A car door slammed. A neighbor, braver than the rest, had called the real police after watching the scene unfold from their porch. Within moments, the front yard was alive with the glare of headlights and the authoritative voices of real officers demanding the imposters step outside. The fake cops froze, their fake authority stripped bare under the undeniable arrival of the genuine. Danielle rose slowly, pulling herself to her full height despite the cuffs binding her hands. Her voice rang out clear and commanding, cutting through the chaos outside. "In here, they're impersonating officers and holding me against my will." The front door burst open and real officers stormed in, weapons drawn, eyes narrowing at the sight before them. Recognition flashed across one officer's face as he saw her.
"Captain Roberts?"
he exclaimed, shock and fury mixing in his tone. The room spun into controlled chaos, the imposters shoved against the wall, their fake badges ripped away, Danielle's cuffs unlocked with trembling hands of a fellow cop who looked both horrified and relieved. The imposters no longer looked like enforcers. They looked like cornered animals, their plan crumbling before their eyes. Danielle rubbed her wrists where the cuffs had bitten deep, her eyes never leaving the men who thought they could break her. "I told you," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "You arrested the wrong woman." The living room had become a battlefield of silence and stares, the air thick with tension as the real officers flooded inside. Weapons trained on the imposters who just hours earlier had strutted with false confidence. The leader of the fake cops raised his hand slightly, but still tried to cling to the facade, his voice trembling but loud. "This is a mistake. We're contracted HOA security." "She's trespassing." His partners chimed in with weak echoes of his lie, holding on to their crumbling story like drowning men clutching driftwood. But the forged documents he had waved earlier now lay on the floor, the pages bent and smudged, evidence of their fabrication obvious even at a glance. One of the real officers picked them up, his brow furrowing before he barked, "This seal isn't even registered. These signatures don't exist in county records. You clowns thought this would work?" His words cut through the imposters' bluff like a knife, leaving them exposed. Their masks of authority ripped away in front of the very people they tried to dominate. Danielle stood tall now, the cuffs finally off, the red marks on her wrists still fresh, but no longer binding her spirit. She stepped forward, her presence commanding the room more than the flashing lights outside or the shouts of officers securing the perimeter. "You thought you could make me powerless," she said, her voice resonant with a fury honed by years of service. "You thought you could strip me of my home, my dignity, and no one would question it. But I took an oath to protect people from predators like you. And tonight, that oath applies to myself." The imposters shrank back, their earlier bravado dissolving under the weight of her words. One muttered, "We were just doing our job." But Danielle snapped back instantly. "Impersonating an officer isn't a job, it's a crime. And you picked the wrong woman to try it on." Outside, the neighborhood had gathered, drawn by the spectacle of sirens and flashing lights. Some held their phones high, recording the scene, while others watched in stunned silence. Whispers rippled through the crowd as word spread. The woman they had doubted, the one they had whispered about as not belonging, was in fact a police captain who had just exposed a dangerous fraud in their midst. An elderly neighbor, who had once refused to meet Danielle's eyes at the mailbox, stepped forward and called out, "We're sorry!" Her voice trembled, but others joined in, murmuring apologies and words of support. The sight was almost surreal. those who had looked at her as an outsider now clapping and nodding in approval, their fear turning into admiration. The real officers tightened their hold on the impostors, one reading off their charges with deliberate clarity: impersonating a peace officer, unlawful imprisonment, home invasion, fraud, and that's just the start. The impostors protested weakly, but no one listened anymore. Their power was gone, their performance shattered under the glare of real law and the authority of a woman they had underestimated. Danielle didn't gloat, she didn't need to. Her strength was in the calm, unwavering stance she held, in the fire in her eyes that told everyone watching that she was not only vindicated, but victorious. As the impostors were marched out, Danielle stepped onto her porch, the night air cool against her skin. The crowd parted, their earlier judgment replaced with respect. Some clapped, others simply bowed their heads in acknowledgement. A neighbor whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "She protected us tonight." Danielle let the words settle in her heart, but her gaze remained on the squad cars pulling away, carrying the men who thought they could erase her with fear. She raised her voice one last time, strong and steady, speaking not just to the officers or the crowd, but to every eye behind every curtain. This is what happens when you let fear silence you. They only had power because you gave it to them. But tonight, they learned you can't intimidate someone who refuses to break. The words hung in the air, powerful, undeniable, as the sirens wailed into the distance. And for the first time since moving into the neighborhood, Danielle felt the ground beneath her feet was truly hers. In the days that followed, the truth unraveled with the weight of a scandal too big to contain. The so-called security officers were not licensed at all, but hired muscle, secretly paid by members of the HOA board who had grown bold in their corruption. Their plan had been simple: drive Danielle out before she could challenge their control of the neighborhood, using intimidation and fear disguised as authority. But their scheme had backfired spectacularly. Local news outlets swarmed the story, painting Danielle not as an outsider, but as a hero who had exposed a rot festering behind manicured lawns and freshly painted fences. Neighbors who once looked at her with suspicion now crossed the street to shake her hand, to thank her for standing tall when they themselves had been too afraid. The HOA board scrambled to deny involvement, but the evidence was undeniable, and one by one, resignations and indictments followed. Danielle, though vindicated, carried herself with quiet humility. She hadn't asked to be the symbol of resistance, yet she became exactly that, a reminder that fear only thrives in silence. Standing on her porch one evening, the same porch where she had been dragged out in handcuffs, she looked over her neighborhood not with bitterness, but with resolve. She knew change would not come overnight, but the first crack in the armor of intimidation had been made, and from that crack, light poured through. With a steady voice, she told a group of gathered neighbors what she had come to believe deep in her bones. They thought they could silence me. Instead, I became the voice that ended their reign of fear, and that's how a night that began with fear ended in a stunning reversal of power. What those impostors never expected was that the woman they tried to humiliate was the very person trained to expose them. Danielle's story is more than just one woman's fight. It's a reminder that courage in the face of intimidation can change everything. If this story shocked you, imagine how many more are out there waiting to be told. That's why you don't want to miss what's coming next. So if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join this channel for more gripping, suspenseful dramatizations that will keep you hooked until the very last second. And here's a little teaser. In our next story, a man's quiet cabin retreat turns into a nightmare when he discovers his neighbors have been hiding a secret that could cost him his freedom, and maybe even his life. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. So stick around, stay subscribed, and prepare yourself for the next twist you never saw coming.